Well, good day and welcome to you. It is Monday, April the 18th. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you happen to be. My name is Gary Willing, and as always, I want to welcome everyone to Search for Signs. And just take a brief moment that if you want to know more about what we talk about here, definitely check out some of the links that I provided in the description portion to get as much background information that you need to really see if there's any truth to this. So hopefully you will do just that. Now, I do have a couple comments to cover from a person. His name is James Pennington. And I find his comments quite beautiful, but I also find them spot on. And I also think that if we talk about it a little bit, maybe we can all understand this information a little bit better. So, James, I really do thank you and others who comment. And I want to kind of focus in on what James had to say in this video. But what did he have to say? My first time hearing about him, so you have my interest. I am a Christian, and I was told I would know when Jesus returns. He would come from the clouds. Jesus was here in flesh once. I didn't think he would return to the flesh. However, I will keep an open mind about this, and I want to know more. And then he went on to say, until all nations stop fighting each other, this cannot happen. I can pray it will, so I really have hope that one day we will. World peace and everyone works together. This world could be so much better. I have always said kindness can change the world. Thanks, James. Now, I want to talk about the second comment about peace and kindness can change the world and so forth. And I really do thank you for that. It's quite a beautiful way of looking at life, let alone commenting. So I appreciate that. It's so true. And then I also want to say real quick before I go into that I also really respect the fact that you are a Christian and yet you keep an open mind about this information. And that just because you keep an open mind doesn't mean that you're going to see that there's truth to it in the end. And also it doesn't mean that you have to agree 100% with what I say. You know what I'm saying? It just means that you're willing to take a look at it and be brave enough to do that. And I really do commend you and others who do this. I'm sure there are people who don't comment, who look at this with an open mind, but so many people just reject it outright. And a lot of times they don't even hear what we have to say on this channel. They don't even bother to take the time to listen. And a lot of times it's just coming from a title. So I really do appreciate you saying that. So hopefully others will take your cues and listen to it with an open mind. Now, in terms of the peace aspect of it, now, Maitreya says, without sharing, there can be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future. Let's take a look at that real quick. I talk about it all the time because it is really the most important thing that we should all be thinking about is how we as a people should bring about peace. Humanity's tried it, 70 ways to Sunday, but nothing has brought about peace yet. Because we haven't tried the one thing that Maitreya has been advocating, except for it was done for a very brief amount of time. I think it ended 71 years ago. But if you look at it historically, the Marshall Plan was a very simplified version of what's going to happen in the future with the principle of sharing. But it kind of gives you a general way that it should look, in terms of sharing of the resources between nations, but also the outcome of it and how it did bring about trust amongst the nations that participated in it. So if you go to Wikipedia and you research the Marshall Plan, you can read all about it. I even included a video in the links that I provided about the description portion, but they don't talk about the Marshall Plan from the perspective that it was the principle of sharing, that if we did just that, it would produce the same result amongst all the nations. If all the nations did exactly what they did in the Marshall Plan, that eventually all the nations would start to trust one another in the same way that those nations trust each other now. But they also don't talk about how, even after it stopped, those nations still trust one another better than they trust any other nations on the planet. So the nations that participated in the Marshall Plan, I'm not saying every one of them was at odds or at war with one another, but there were a lot of them that were. But since then, none of them have attacked one another. So it brought about trust amongst those nations better than it would have, I think, if they hadn't tried the Marshall Plan. So that is historical evidence that what the teacher is saying is true, that sharing alone will bring about justice and eventually bring about peace. So it's kindness really manifested in real time, in real life, and not just talking about it, is the principle of sharing. But it has to do with resources being shared amongst nations, really, is where it's going to start. And that's what he's going to advocate. But until humanity sees that its own survival is in jeopardy, unless we create peace, and I guess it's going to have to get even worse than it is even today, we're not going to do anything about it. The corporations that are in control of those resources, the governments that are in control of those resources, aren't willing to give them up because they don't trust one another. And the corporations are only interested in the profits that come from hoarding those resources and charging other people to use those resources, whatever they happen to be. But the return of the Christ is not only about the return of the awaited teacher, but it's also about the awakening of the hearts of humanity. So as humanity starts to wake up to the truth that our survival depends upon whether we create peace or not, when that starts to happen, the will of the people are going to force governments, force corporations to give those resources to other countries that need it. Now, the masters say every country without exception has an excess of at least one resource to give back in payment for the resources that they need. But every country has needs, and every country has excesses that they have. And so that's kind of how it would look. But if you research the Marshall Plan, it will give you a better understanding of it. But it's a very simplified version of what will happen. But yet, instead of it stopping after 3 or 4 years, it's going to keep going. So peace in and of itself doesn't have to be perfect right away. It's going to be more of just trust and a little bit of goodwill amongst these nations. And then we can do just what you did. Make the world a better place. Start solving the problems that seem insurmountable today. It'd be very easy if we all worked together, just as you commented. That's why I think it's quite an extraordinary comment, the way that you said it, because it is true. If we were all kind to one another, we would make the world a better place, right? But we could solve the problems like the environment. We could solve other problems that are, terrorism and those kind of things, hunger. But it would at the very early stages of the principle of sharing, the extreme poverty that exists on our planet would start to get erased, and those people who are living and dying of starvation in a world of plenty, that would end. And that in and of itself would ease the tensions within all of us, all over the world. It's affecting each and every one of us. We don't realize that it is. Even the ultra-rich are being affected by this disparity. They don't see it like that, but it does create tensions within them because it's living contrary to what your heart is saying is true. Now, Maitreya, and the gift that Maitreya has for who he is right now for humanity is, within his heart is the truth that we are all one, but also within the hearts of all of us is that same truth. And because of who he is, because of the love nature of who he is, it's waking humanity up rather slowly, just not that fast, but it's waking humanity up to the truth that we are one. Now, the second part that I wanted to talk about in terms of your Christian faith and having an open mind and the return of the Christ coming from the clouds and so forth. When I talk about the Christ, and if you research and go and share international, let's say, and you listen to Benjamin Creme talk about who and what the Christ is and the awaited teacher, he's not referring to Maitreya as the only true Son of God. He's referring to him from the esoteric view of who and what the Christ really is. So esoteric knowledge, when you use the term esoteric teachings or esoteric knowledge, a lot of people who don't know what that means, they view it as taboo, like the occult. Oh my gosh, it's something sinister and dark. It really isn't. It just means that which is hidden. And exoteric knowledge means that which is widely known. Now, the best example that I can come up with to kind of explain what esoteric knowledge is, what exoteric knowledge is, and the process of transfer between esoteric to more and more exoteric knowledge would be that the world was flat. It was seen for centuries, or eons probably, that the earth was actually flat. That's what people thought, based on what they saw. They see it, the way that we perceive the world to be, it looks flat from our perspective, but it isn't. It's round, it's a globe. Now, centuries ago, people like Copernicus and other early scientists set out to prove that the earth was not flat, that the earth was actually round. They were inspired by these masters in some way to bring that truth to the public. But they had to prove it scientifically, and they had crude instruments. I think they're quite extraordinary instruments based on the technology that they had, but they didn't have the ability to shoot up into space and and take pictures and so forth. So they had to use, measurements in a way that are quite simple, but yet quite extraordinary at the same time, if you know what I mean. But they proved, early on that the earth was actually round. Of course, it didn't just become widely known at that point. It took centuries for it to become more and more known, more and more accepted as a truth that the world is not flat. And now we have pictures from space. We've had people that have gone up into space, come back and talk about it, that really prove that the earth is actually round. Now, I know, and I always put this as a disclaimer when I talk about this, that there are people that still think the earth is flat, but I don't want to talk about that now, because I could go on for hours about why that's happening. But anyway, by and large, most people in the world know the truth that the earth is actually round and see that there's no truth that the earth is flat. So it became exoteric knowledge. The esoteric knowledge transferred over to the mainstream, and now it's exoteric knowledge that the earth is actually a globe. You see what I'm saying? So the exoteric view of the Christ from the Christian point of view is that he is the only true Son of God, that he's separate from humanity. God is separate from humanity. You have to go to the churches to pray. You have to go to give the tithe to the churches every Sunday and so forth in order to experience God in a way. They might not say it like that, but that's what they're at least implying. That's what gives them the financial power in the way that they have. The churches do it all. They've done it for centuries. They're the intermediaries between humanity and Jesus and God. You got to go to them. You got to go to church and pray. You can't just experience the love of Jesus or God or whatever on your own. You got to go to them. You got to tithe. And now there are people who have taken advantage of that, and they're the prosperity, churches and so forth, that when you give to them, you become rich yourself. I mean, all that kind of nonsense. But anyway, that's the exoteric view of who and what the Christ is. The esoteric view of the Christ, and I'm going to read an article from Benjamin Creme's master that really, I think, speaks to the heart and who and what the Christ is, the possibility for humanity, because the Christ is here in the way that he is. But briefly, we as people think that we are at the top of the evolutionary heap. Scientists say, the mystics thinks that there's nothing above humanity. We're the top. That there's the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and then us, and then nothing else. Well, there's no truth to that. There's actually kingdoms above humanity that go on forever. And immediately above humanity, even on our planet, are the masters of wisdom, who are coming back into the world after being forgotten about for eons. They never left the world. They were living secluded from humanity, but they worked with humanity indirectly through their disciples in the world. So Jesus, when he was in Palestine, was just a disciple. He was a very, very advanced disciple, even by today's standards. But back then, it was just extraordinary how advanced he was relative to the humanity of that time and the consciousness of that time. But Maitreya was already a master. He was the first of our humanity to become a master. He was in the Himalayas. Jesus was in Palestine, and he worked telepathically and gave his teachings out through Jesus telepathically to the people of the time. Just as the Buddha, who is another Christ on this planet, worked telepathically through the Prince Gautama and taught the people of that time. Other disciples don't have that kind of relationship, but there have been disciples throughout history that had a telepathic, close relationship with these masters taught through them. So when Jesus was teaching to the people, more than likely it was Maitreya's teachings that he was teaching. Other times Jesus was teaching the people directly and so forth, and it was just Jesus talking. And then it's been said other times it was like a chorus. They both were speaking at the same time. But Jesus became the Christ when Maitreya started working through him, just as the Gautama Buddha became the Buddha when the Buddha, who was a master at that time, worked through him in that way. That's the esoteric view. But the potential for humanity is far greater, when it's reference to the Christ, is far greater than even what the Christians think, because it has to do with the fact that, and the truth that the Christ is one of us, that he suffered and the trials and tribulations of what we're all going through and triumphed over it and became who and what he is. And isn't this being that comes from above, he was one of us. But I want to segue into and end the video reading an article that I've read before, The Son of Man by Benjamin Creme's master, but he explains better than I could ever possibly explain about who and what the Christ really is from an esoteric perspective and the truth of who and what it is. Of course, just, I'm glad you said you wanted to listen to it with open mind, James, but, hopefully you can hear this all the way through and listen to it with an open mind. But if you want to read it for yourself, definitely check out the Share International site and check out the little tab that says Articles by the Master. And this particular article is written in there, and you can read it for yourself. So hopefully you'll do that. The Son of Man by Benjamin Creme's master. Many people await the return of the Christ with trepidation and fear. They sense that his appearance will promote great changes in all departments of life. His values, they rightly assume, will necessarily alter their ways of thinking and living, and they blanch at such a prospect. Besides, so mystical has been the view of the Christ presented down the centuries by the churches that many fear his judgment and omnipotent power. They await him as God come to punish the wicked and reward the faithful. It is sadly to be regretted that such a distorted vision of the Christ should so have permeated human consciousness. No such being exists. In order to understand the true nature of the Christ, it is necessary to see him as one among equal sons of God, each endowed with full divine potential, differing only in the degree of manifestation of that divinity. That he has achieved the fullness of that divinity is his glory, and well may we stand in reverence at this achievement. That this same achievement is rare indeed is also indisputably true. But the wonder of the Christ for men is that he was one of them. Not there is in the trials and sufferings of men, but he did know it. Each step of the path that men still tread has he painfully trodden. Nothing is there in the whole panorama of human experience that he has not shared. Thus truly is he the Son of Man. There can be little doubt that were he to appear unannounced in our midst, few would recognize him. So far from the general notion is he that he would pass unnoticed in the crowd. Thus it is today among his brothers as he awaits man's invitation to begin his mission. Many who see him daily know him not. Others recognize him but are afraid to speak. Still others wait and pray, hopeful that he may be the one for whom they dare not hope. Only his declaration before the world will establish him in the sight and hearts of men. While we wait that day of days, let us clarify in our minds the reason for his return. Let us understand the nature of the task which he has set himself. To establish in our midst the fact of God has he come. To recreate the divine mysteries is he here. To teach men how to love and love again is he among us. To establish man's brotherhood does he walk the earth once more. To keep faith with the Father and with man, does he accept this burden? To usher in the new age has he returned, to consolidate the treasures of the past, to inspire the marvels of the future, to glorify God and man has he descended from his high mountain. Let us look at his priorities: the establishment of peace, the inauguration of the system of sharing, the removal of guilt and fear, the cleansing of the hearts and minds of men, the education of mankind in the laws of life and love, an introduction to the mysteries, the beautification of our cities, the removal of barriers of travel and interchange of peoples, the creation of a pool of knowledge accessible to all. That such a task is not an easy one, not even for the Son of Man, is clear. Ancient habits of division and separation have strong roots, while fear and superstition cast their spell over millions of mankind. But never before in the history of the world has a teacher come better equipped for his task. Maitreya has come to do battle with ignorance and fear, division and want. His weapons are spiritual understanding, knowledge, and love. His shining armor is truth itself.
Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.